Sir Roger Douglas.
Mr. Speaker, on the 28th of May 2009, I said in this House that this is a budget of deficit, a deficit of spending, a deficit of current account, a deficit of courage, and more importantly, a deficit of imagination. I now realise I got it wrong. I was far too generous to the government. This country is up the proverbial creek, not only without a paddle, but in a boat that is quickly sinking. We are running a cash deficit of $300 million a week, which will rise dramatically over the next few months, and the government's responsibility has been to simply sit on its hands. They have refused to do the right thing. They are happy to fund reports, to hold press conferences, to give speeches, thereby doing everything humanly possible to avoid making any decision that might in any way make them unpopular. I, for one, am sick of that. To be fair, New Zealand faces problems that are of a long-standing nature, not necessarily of this government's making. But the point I would make, Mr. Speaker, the government is the government, and it is their responsibility to fix it. If we look around the world, we can see a number of inspiring examples of governments that have had the guts to do what is right, make the tough decisions, and are now enjoying tremendous success. Their economic prosperity has meant that the vulnerable and the old in their societies are looked after. The physically able have access to productive jobs. The sick have access to health care, and their children are well educated. These are the hallmarks of a well-functioning society. For many politicians in this House, a vision of a prosperous society, it seems, is just too difficult for them to fathom. Steve Chadwick made this clear when she said recently that her children had already resigned themselves to earning less in New Zealand than they would overseas. Is this the sort of vision and inspiration we will see coming out of the Labour Party in the future? What a great future and vision she has instilled in her children for New Zealand. Instead of looking for reforms that could see us past Australia, many politicians in this House have simply given up. In this speech, I do not want to focus on a comparison with Australia. The National Party, by rejecting the 2025 task force, shows that they, in turn, do not want to catch Australia. This seems to be too ambitious for them. Rather, I want to look at a country that we should be outperforming in almost every respect, Singapore. Singapore has everything against it. It is roughly the same size population as New Zealand. It has absolutely no mineral wealth, and it could easily fit inside Lake Taupo. In almost every respect, we should outperform them. However, the reality is that we do not even come close. Let us draw comparisons between the two countries. First, New Zealand GDP growth in 2010 was under 1%. Singapore grew by a whopping 14%. In 1960, our GDP value was almost 3 times that of Singapore. In the last 20 years, Singapore has raced ahead. Singapore will have a GDP value 3 times that of New Zealand by 2015. So in 1960, our GDP was 3 times Singapore's. 2015, their GDP will be 3 times ours. If we look at labour productivity per capita in New Zealand dollars, Singapore productivity in 2010 was 182,000. New Zealand, by comparison, was 90,000. And you can see how the gap grew quickly from 2000 on. Why have they been able to achieve such prosperity with no minerals, no land, and a relatively small population? They certainly did not do it, I suggest, by giving loans of $43 million to private television channels out of government coffers. It is because they were willing, Mr. Speaker, to make the tough decision. GDP, 17%, and that compares to New Zealand's 43%. Their tax rates are also low. The top tax rate, and I have a chart here, their top tax rate is 20 cents in the dollar, and it doesn't cut in until you earn $320,000. $320,000. New Zealand's top rate kicks in at 33 cents at 70,000. Now, the first 20,000 for low-income earners in Singapore is tax-free, and the next 15,000 they only pay 2 cents in the dollar. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, their politicians had a vision for the future of their country. They put aside short-term political gains and focused on the future. In short, Mr. Speaker, they had the guts to do what was right. They outlined a blueprint of where they wanted to go, and they moved swiftly to achieve it. In doing so, they left New Zealand in the dust. But that is not enough. That's enough of that. What vision should we lay for New Zealand's future? The first point we should be is not to accept apathy and poverty as many do today. We need new leadership which is inspired and want to do the best for New Zealand and not necessarily their political party. We need politicians who are prepared to implement quality reform. At the heart of any reform program in New Zealand which is going to be successful, Mr. Speaker, we need to achieve a switch from government delivery to private sector delivery like Singapore did in a whole range of industry. In health, for example, Mr. Speaker, the Singapore government only spends 1 to 3% of GDP. In New Zealand, we spend 9% of GDP. But in every area of the health sector, they have better outcomes. Their death rate at birth is only a quarter of New Zealand, and so it goes on up the scale. What people do there, Mr. Speaker, is save for some of their own health costs, and they take catastrophic cover. And they also encourage the best doctors from around the world to come to their country. In education, Mr. Speaker, the outcomes for the lowest third of their population, the poorest third, is extremely high. And 2/3 of people in the lowest education bracket in Singapore score within the top 2/3 of their primary school leaving examinations. Mr. Speaker, only when we in New Zealand are willing to look forward and devolve control of much of what the government currently spends to individuals will we deliver solutions to the problems that low incomes in particular face. New Zealand has become a nation rife with bureaucracy, recklessly determined to reuse the ideas that have failed to solve poverty and other social ills over the last 80 years, poor education outcomes and poor health outcomes. But if we always, Mr. Speaker, if we always do what we've always done, then we'll always get what we've always got. What 80 years of political control has achieved is a larger welfare budget, more people on welfare, and barriers for those at the bottom to actually get ahead. It's time that we looked at countries like Singapore and had the guts to implement the type of policies they did.